still remember the morning I decided things couldn't go on the way they had for so long. I woke up while the sky was still tinted with streaks of pale orange. My heart thudded in my chest as I got out of bed, tiptoeing around the house so I wouldn't wake my wife, Rebecca. Soft floorboards creaked in protest under my feet, and though it was an everyday sound, that morning it felt like a distant thunderclap that might reveal everything I had kept hidden. A swirl of questions circled in my mind. Why did something so simple feel so momentous? When I finally reached the spare room, I turned the doorknob as quietly as I could, slipped inside, and let the door click shut behind me. I had already planned it the night before, a floral dress I had ordered online and hidden in the depths of the closet. I'd felt ridiculous for needing to hide an item of clothing, but for years, I'd convinced myself I had no choice. My chest tightened when I reached up and pulled that dress off the highest shelf. The soft cotton slid between my fingers, the pattern of tiny pink flowers against a teal background more vibrant in the early morning light than I had expected. It looked cheerful, hopeful even. I spread it out on the bed, smoothing the wrinkles as if handling some delicate relic, before stepping away to steady myself. Thoughts of the past rumbled through my mind. I'd been a teenager the first time I'd felt a pull toward dresses. I hadn't understood the urge back then, only that seeing a garment so different from my usual jeans and t-shirts intrigued me in a way that wouldn't leave my head. I would stare at them in store windows, imagining the soft swish of fabric against my legs. But I was brought up in a house that believed men were men and women were women, and never the twain shall meet, at least in fashion. So I buried the urge. I told myself it was a weird quirk, something to ignore. Time passed. I went to college, met Rebecca, fell in love. We dated, married, built our life together with shared dreams and matching coffee mugs. We had 2 children, Kelly and Mark, now both in their 20s. Through it all, this other side of me remained a secret. The part that wanted to wear a dress and feel that airy lightness flutter around my body. All the while, I wondered if I was broken. Men's magazines never mentioned it. Movies didn't either, unless it was a punchline to a joke. So I tried my best to lock it away, but the feeling persisted, creeping into my thoughts at random moments. Even at the grocery store, if I caught sight of a flowing skirt or a lacy sundress, my chest would squeeze with longing. I told myself I was being foolish. That morning, though, I felt I had reached a turning point. I slipped off my pajamas and hesitated for the longest moment before I slid the dress over my head. The cotton rustled against my torso, the hem settling just below my knees. When I faced the spare room mirror, I expected to feel overwhelmed by shame or confusion. Instead, I felt relief. The reflection was still me, the same broad shoulders, the same face lined from years of living, just with different fabric draping around my frame. A wave of something warm and hopeful washed through me. I couldn't help tracing the edges of the dress with my fingertips. Even though I stood alone in that quiet room, the weight of decades of self-condemnation melted, if only for a second. I inhaled slowly, steeling myself, and then walked to the door. My plan was to change back quickly, stow the dress away, and maybe try again another time. But I underestimated how freeing that moment in front of the mirror would feel. Part of me wanted to keep that feeling of calm a little longer. So instead of changing back, I reached for the doorknob and stepped out into the hallway, my heart drumming so loudly that I expected it to echo off the walls. I eased toward the kitchen, the dress swishing lightly against my legs. Early sunshine slipped through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. At the kitchen table, I paused. Then I heard the soft creak of the staircase. Rebecca was awake. My breath caught. She would see me, and there was no chance to reverse course without making the moment even more dramatic. I braced myself for her reaction. Every footstep on the stairs made my hands tremble. When she entered the kitchen, she almost dropped the mug she was carrying. We stood frozen in that quiet hush before words. I watched her eyes dart from my face down to the floral print and back up again. She opened her mouth, closed it, then took a measured breath. "Paul," she said softly, you look different." She pressed her lips together and set the mug on the counter. I cleared my throat, trying to moisten the dryness in my mouth. "I'm sorry," I murmured. "I should have told you a long time ago." Then I felt tears sting my eyes. "I thought you'd hate me for this." Her expression shifted. Concern, confusion, and something like compassion all mingled. She reached out and rested a hand lightly on my arm. "Let's sit," she said. We settled across from each other at the small table. The hardwood seat felt cool beneath me, and the dress felt more noticeable than ever as I tried to fold my hands in my lap. Neither of us knew quite where to begin. Finally, she gave a tentative smile. I never guessed. Why now?" Her voice wavered but held genuine curiosity. I tried to keep my composure, though my voice shook. I've wanted to do this for a really long time. I was afraid, and I didn't want you to see me as less, or feel like you somehow married someone you didn't know." I swallowed. "But it doesn't change how I feel about you, about us. It's just something I do. I guess I want more honesty." Her eyes flickered, and she exhaled. For a long moment, it was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Then she said, "I need some time with this." She wasn't angry, as I had feared. She was unsettled, perhaps, but not harsh. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm not sure I understand, but I love you. That's still there." Her words felt like a lifeline. I grasped her hand across the table. Tears blurred my vision, and I murmured, "Thank you. Take all the time you need." That was how the new chapter in our marriage began. In the days that followed, I went back to wearing my usual t-shirts and jeans around the house, waiting for her to decide how she felt. We had hushed conversations at the dinner table and in bed. Sometimes we said nothing, just listened to each other's breathing in the dark. She asked me questions. Did I still feel attracted to her? Yes, with all my heart. Was I sure this didn't mean I was living with some big secret about who I was attracted to? I told her that I had never questioned that aspect. It was simply about clothes that felt right to me. She took that in with thoughtful silence. After a couple of weeks, she approached me one evening while I washed dishes. The kitchen lights made her eyes glimmer. "Would you like to wear one of the dresses you bought, around me?" she asked, a tiny tremor in her voice. I set the dish down. "Are you sure? I don't want you to be uncomfortable." She squeezed my soapy hand in hers. "We can both be a bit uncomfortable and see if it becomes more normal." I didn't need to be asked twice. Within minutes, I was wearing that same floral dress, the same one she'd found me in. We sat down on the couch together. My heart hammered, but she curled an arm around my shoulders and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. So we did, side by side, the flicker of the TV dancing across our faces. She didn't shrink away. I felt something shift between us that night, a new honesty in the hush of our living room. Not once did she say she was entirely at ease, but she didn't run from the moment either. Things continued in fits and starts. Some days I sensed her apprehension, as if she didn't know where to look when I wore the dresses. Other days, she made small gestures that hinted at acceptance, like offering me a new pair of sandals that matched one of my outfits. I tried not to push. My biggest worry was how our children would react. Kelly, at 23, lived across town and visited on weekends, while Mark, at 21, was away at college most of the year. They'd grown up in a fairly traditional household. I couldn't guess how they'd take the news that their dad wore dresses. My opportunity to find out arrived sooner than I hoped. One Sunday afternoon, Kelly dropped by unexpectedly. Rebecca was in the backyard clipping roses, and I'd just grabbed my mail from the box. I was wearing a casual sundress, white with small blue flowers, because honestly, I'd started wearing them around the house more often. I heard the front door swing open before I could dash upstairs and change. Kelly strolled in, a set of car keys jingling in her hand. When she looked up, her entire body froze. "Dad?" she said, voice tight with shock. I stood there, the letters in my grip crinkling. "Kelly, hi. I didn't realize you'd be over." My cheeks burned, and the air felt suffocating. Her eyes went up and down, taking in the outfit. She opened her mouth, shut it, then swallowed. "What's going on?" she asked, sounding both surprised and worried. I motioned awkwardly toward the living room. "Let's sit and talk." She followed me in, silent as she dropped her purse on the armchair. I was so tense I nearly forgot to breathe. We sat across from each other, me on the couch, her in the chair. For several seconds, neither of us knew what to say. Finally, I cleared my throat. "I've been wearing dresses," I said softly, "on and off, actually for a long time, but I kept it hidden. Your mom knows now, and I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't know how." Kelly's eyes were wide. "Why? Are you—" She paused, searching for the right words. "Does this change anything else?" My heart pounded. "I'm still your father. My feelings about who I love, those haven't changed at all. This is just something I do, something that feels right for me." She blinked, swirling her thoughts around. Then her gaze softened, though there was confusion there too. "You didn't think I'd be okay with this, did you?" I shrugged helplessly. "I worried I might lose your respect." She stood, came over to me, and sat down carefully on the couch's edge. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "It's weird. I'm not going to lie. I mean, you were always in suits and shirts. But She hesitated, then wrapped her arms around me. "I love you. It's just clothes, right?" Tears threatened to spill from my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered, my throat tight. "Yes, it's just clothes." She nodded slowly, though I sensed she was still processing. A few minutes later, Rebecca walked in, gardening gloves still on her hands. She seemed startled to see Kelly, but Kelly just waved at her with a small grin and said, "Mom, I ran into Dad in his new outfit." Rebecca looked uncertain for a moment, but Kelly added, "I think it's okay, just going to take some getting used to." Then the three of us shared a tense little laugh, the relief palpable in the room. With Kelly, that initial shock gave way to curious questions. She asked me how long I'd felt this way, why I hadn't told her. The next few weeks brought longer talks on the phone. She confessed it was odd, but she also said, "If it makes you happy, Dad, who am I to judge? Just maybe give me some time to see you in a new light." I appreciated her openness more than I could express. Explaining things to Mark was more daunting because he was away at college. I finally picked up the phone and called him one evening. My palms were damp as I paced the living room. Rebecca sat beside me, knitting quietly, and I could feel her supportive presence. Mark answered cheerfully, and I tried to match his tone at first, asking about his classes, his dorm life. Then my voice grew shaky as I transitioned to the reason for my call. "Mark, there's something I need to tell you," I began, leaning against the couch. "I've been experimenting with wearing dresses. Actually, it's more than an experiment. It's part of who I am." There was a long pause on the other end. "Dad," he said, sounding puzzled. "I don't understand. You mean like wearing dresses around the house? Publicly? Both?" I pressed my lips together. "Both, sometimes. It's comfortable for me in ways I can't quite put into words. But I'm still me." I could hear him breathing, clearly at a loss. "I wish you'd told me in person," he said eventually. "I know. I'm sorry," I replied quietly. I was afraid." He let out a slow breath. "Well, I can't say I get it, but I still love you. That doesn't change." Relief flooded me as we continued talking for a while, albeit awkwardly. Mark was less openly curious than Kelly. He tended to keep his emotions guarded. But before we hung up, he added, "When I come home for break, I want us to still do all our usual stuff, okay? Watching sports, playing tennis, all of that." I laughed through my tears. Of course, that's not changing. Time moved forward, and with each passing week, I allowed myself a bit more freedom. Eventually, I built a small but cherished collection of dresses, skirts, blouses. They were bright, subtle, casual, dressy. Everything I never let myself explore before. I started jokingly referring to myself as Pauline when I wore them, though I never asked anyone else to. It was just a playful nod. Kelly found it amusing. Mark rolled his eyes but smiled, and Rebecca, well, she chuckled at the nickname. It eased the tension that sometimes cropped up. The biggest test was leaving the house in a dress for the first time in broad daylight. Sure, I'd discreetly gone for late-night drives wearing a dress before. Once or twice, I'd even gone to a 24-hour grocery store in the next town over. But that was always under the cover of darkness, heart pounding, eyes darting left and right. Then came a day I needed to pick up something from the hardware store, and I was already wearing a simple teal dress. It hit me. Why not just go as I was? Rebecca peeked around the doorway when she saw me hesitating in the front hall. "You're going to go like that?" she asked, though her tone lacked judgment. She was simply stating the obvious. I nodded, swallowing. "I think so. I need to get used to people seeing me." Her face softened. "Okay," she replied, and she gave me a gentle hug before I left. "Text me if you need me." Driving there was nerve-wracking, but the real moment of truth came when I stepped out of the car in broad daylight. The parking lot was half full. A few heads turned. One older man in a baseball cap stared. But nobody approached me. My heart raced as I walked through the automatic doors, feeling the breeze around my legs in a place I'd only ever gone in jeans. Part of me braced for ridicule, but for the most part, people went about their business. One or two double takes, a curious glance from the cashier, but nothing catastrophic happened. I even made small talk at the register about the unseasonably warm weather. When I got back to the car, I found my hands shaking from the adrenaline rush. Yet I also felt lighter. This was real. I could breathe. Of course, life wasn't all smooth. Some folks from our neighborhood whispered. I'd see them on the sidewalk, their eyes sliding away when we crossed paths, or drifting down to my outfit in confusion or discomfort. There were tense moments. A neighbor, Mrs. Russell, made a pointed remark to Rebecca about proper attire for men. I heard about it later, and it stung, but we did our best to focus on the friends who remained supportive. An old buddy of mine, James, surprised me by reacting with an easy laugh and saying, "Man, Paul, if it makes you happy, do it. Just don't try to get me in a dress." He slapped my back, and the tension bled away. At work, things got tricky. I ran a small finance team, and though I'd gone to the office in traditional menswear every day of my adult life, I found myself yearning to be more authentic. But the company had a conservative culture, and I wasn't sure how they would handle it if I started wearing dresses. For a while, I kept them strictly at home. I felt a pang every morning, exchanging comfortable skirts for gray slacks, bright blouses for button-downs. Then, after a month of building up my nerve, I decided to speak to HR about the issue. My hand shook slightly as I knocked on the HR manager's door and requested a private conversation. Jennifer, the HR manager, gave me a kind but professional smile. "Come in, Paul. What can I do for you?" I closed the door gently behind me and took a seat. "There's something personal I need to discuss," I began, voice low. "I wear dresses outside of work. It's part of who I am, but I'm concerned about how that might be received here." Jennifer listened carefully, hands folded on her desk. To my relief, she was open-minded. She told me that as long as I adhered to the general dress code, professional attire, clean, presentable, there was no explicit ban on men wearing dresses or skirts. "That said," she cautioned, "we're all aware it might raise eyebrows, but we're committed to fostering a respectful environment." So, on a Monday morning, I walked into my office in a tailored black skirt suit, the closest approximation to typical professional wear, yet distinctly more feminine than anything I'd worn to work before. My nerves were frayed, but I held my head high. A hush fell over my colleagues as I walked through the halls. One coworker blurted, "Whoa!" before he caught himself. Another looked away, uncomfortable. Yet by lunch, a few people approached with polite, if cautious, words of curiosity. My direct boss simply said, "Let's talk performance metrics at 2, as if nothing were out of the ordinary. I was never more grateful for that level of normalcy. The days turned into weeks, and while some colleagues kept their distance, others treated me just the same as before, or were even kinder, sensing my vulnerability. Over time, I realized that the tension existed more in my own mind than in reality, though I couldn't deny that a few quiet judgments hung in the air. Still, I went on delivering reports, leading meetings, and doing everything I'd done before. The swirling uncertainty subsided. Eventually, the novelty wore off, and office life chugged along, dresses or not. At home, Rebecca found her own ways to navigate this uncharted territory. She asked if she could offer outfit suggestions sometimes, not because she was mocking me, but because she genuinely liked picking out clothes that flattered me. We stood in front of the bedroom mirror one evening, examining a skirt that felt too tight around my waist. She tapped her chin thoughtfully and said, "You need something with a more flexible fabric, and maybe a different color. This one washes you out." We both laughed, and that moment felt so simple, so warm. Still, not everything was laughter. One Saturday, I mustered the courage to attend a community event, a charity fair in a local park, wearing a casual dress. Rebecca joined me. We wandered the booths, sampling baked goods and checking out local crafts. A few older community members nodded politely. Then, near the cotton candy stand, I overheard a couple of men snickering. Their whispers were obvious, their side glances more so. I overheard one of them mutter, "That's messed up," just loud enough for me to catch. My stomach clenched, and I quickly looked away. Rebecca noticed my tense posture and squeezed my hand gently. I forced a neutral expression and moved on, but the sting lingered. Even though I tried to be strong, moments like that brought back the old fear that had gripped me for decades. Over dinner that night, I grew quiet, pushing my food around my plate. Rebecca set down her fork and touched my hand. "Paul," she said gently, "talk to me." I shook my head, forcing a tight smile. "Nothing, just some people will never understand." She let out a slow breath. "They might not, but that doesn't mean you have to hide." My eyes flicked up to meet hers. I could see a tenderness there that fortified me. We talked about the future, about how we might handle more public situations. She admitted she sometimes felt uneasy when people stared, not because she was ashamed, but because she worried it might escalate. She didn't want me hurt, verbally or otherwise. I assured her I'd be cautious, that I didn't intend to thrust myself into conflict, yet we both knew I couldn't live in the shadows forever. We concluded that life would always have onlookers or critics, and I was simply going to live as I was, with my head held high, if at all possible. A few months later, Kelly and Mark were both home for a visit. Mark had finished his semester, and Kelly took a week off work. We decided to have a small family gathering in the backyard, complete with a barbecue and a cooler full of soda. It was a typically warm day, the sun shining bright. I wore knee-length shorts, I still wore them at times, and a t-shirt, a nod to the messy nature of grilling. But as the afternoon wore on, we chatted about plans and changes. Kelly asked if I'd be comfortable going shopping for dresses with her, telling me about some new arrivals in her favorite store. Mark listened quietly, sipping his soda. Then he turned to me and said, "Dad, do you mind if I ask something?" My throat went dry. "Sure," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. He hesitated, then said, "I guess I just want to know how it feels for you, wearing a dress. Like, does it feel that much better than typical clothes?" I paused, assembling my thoughts. "There's a sense of relief in it," I replied carefully. "I don't feel squeezed into an identity that's not mine. My body feels lighter in a way, like I can breathe. And it's not just the physical aspect. There's something else, like I'm not hiding. It makes me feel more at ease." He nodded thoughtfully, eyes flickering. "I get it, sort of. Maybe not fully, but I see that it's important to you." "That's enough for me," I told him. That night, after Kelly left to meet friends and Mark retreated to the guest room, Rebecca and I sat outside on the patio. The sky was a deep indigo, dotted with stars, and the air smelled of fresh-cut grass. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "You're doing it," she said softly, wrapping an arm around my waist. "Living your life." Her statement settled over me like a gentle blanket. I knew we still had hurdles, but for now, I let myself feel a small surge of calm. The next few months were a lesson in balancing the new and the old. I attended gatherings of acquaintances with my usual button-down shirts, especially if I suspected the environment might be outright hostile. But I also wore dresses to casual social events with close friends, trusting them not to make a spectacle. Rebecca and I made an unspoken agreement to figure this out together, one day at a time. We also decided to open up more to extended family. My sister, Angela, was the most significant conversation to have. We hadn't been extremely close in recent years, but I still valued her opinion. She lived in another state, so we arranged a video call. My nerves flared as soon as her face appeared on the screen. We made small talk at first, her job, my job, the weather, before I delicately turned the conversation. "Angie," I said, "there's something I need you to know about me." Rebecca squeezed my shoulder as she sat beside me, just out of the camera's view. I wear dresses sometimes, actually quite often now." Angela blinked, clearly taken aback, but her expression stayed neutral. "Okay," she said slowly. "Is this a new development?" I glanced at Rebecca, then back at the screen. "I felt this way for years. I just never told anyone. Now, I've decided I can't hide it. It doesn't change how I feel about Rebecca or anything else. It's just clothing that feels right for me." Angela processed this, tapping her fingers. After a long moment, she broke into a small smile. "You know, Paul, you always were the braver sibling. Even when we were kids, you'd do things I never dared." She shook her head, still looking a bit baffled, but her tone held warmth. "I don't entirely get it, but I'm not going to judge you for it. You do what you need to do." Hearing that acceptance from a family member was a relief that nearly made me cry. After the call ended, Rebecca and I shared a wordless hug. It was moments like that which reminded me of how fortunate I was, even in the middle of confusion and the occasional heartbreak. Eventually, the word spread in our circle of acquaintances, and we navigated a mix of responses, some supportive, some ambivalent, a few openly critical. On one difficult occasion, a former colleague saw me in a department store and muttered a slur under his breath as he walked past. I froze, feeling a rush of humiliation. But I stood tall, refusing to let him see the hurt. Later, I wept at home, with Rebecca's arms around me. We talked through the sting together. As time passed, little daily rituals emerged. On certain mornings, Rebecca and I would stand in the bathroom, brushing our teeth, and she'd tell me, "You should try that new dress you got for your birthday." Or I'd lean over her shoulder as she put on her makeup, and sometimes we'd experiment with subtle eyeliner on me, just to see how it looked. There were plenty of days I still wore my regular men's clothes. I never intended to get rid of them altogether, and some days I just felt like jeans and a t-shirt. The difference was, now I had a choice. One Saturday, while strolling through a local outdoor market, I stumbled on a vintage clothing stall. A shimmering purple dress with a cinched waist caught my eye. I gravitated to it like it was calling my name. The vendor, an older woman with a warm smile, walked over. "That one's a beauty, isn't it? It'd look lovely on you, dear," she said, without a hint of condescension. My stomach flipped in pleasant surprise, and I took the dress off the rack to examine it. Rebecca sidled up next to me, whispering, "That color would be great with your eyes." I felt a grin spread across my face as I bought it. Moments like that, simple and affirming, made the hard parts more bearable. Later that summer, Kelly moved back into town for a new job opportunity. She would often drop by in the evenings, rummaging through our fridge, complaining about the rising cost of groceries, and then she'd greet me, not batting an eyelash if I was in a dress. Mark visited during his semester break, and he seemed more comfortable than before, although he didn't bring it up often. Instead, he chose to let his acceptance show in a subtle way, like joking about how Dad's fashion sense is better than mine. That was his version of support, and I treasured it. One evening, we had a family dinner with both kids, plus a couple of Rebecca's relatives. I wore a modest denim skirt and a sweater. While we were setting the table, Kelly looked up and said, "Dad, I never told you this, but I'm proud that you're living how you want to live." She hesitated, realizing she'd said it in front of everyone. Her cheeks reddened slightly, but she soldiered on. "I mean, it can't be easy, but you're doing it." The table fell quiet, and I noticed Rebecca's aunt shifting uncomfortably. But Kelly's words washed over me with such warmth. I cleared my throat, emotions welling up. "Thank you, sweetheart." I didn't want to drag out the moment or make anyone more uneasy, so I simply squeezed her hand. Then I said, "Now, who's passing the potatoes?" That small burst of laughter around the table broke the tension. In the following months, I ventured out more confidently, stepping into new territory. Dinner at restaurants in a dress, attending a friend's wedding in a tasteful gown. Yes, I received stares, but many were simply curious or mildly puzzled, not overtly hostile. A few people complimented the outfit, and some asked polite questions. Each outing tested the boundaries of my comfort, but in a way, it also expanded them. I learned that people's judgments, while painful, did not define me. I continued being a father, a husband, a manager at my job. I began to see that a dress was fabric, yes, but it also represented the unspoken parts of myself, I had hidden for too long. One memorable moment occurred at a local charity gala. It was a semi-formal event, so Rebecca wore an elegant black dress, and I debated between a dark suit or a complimentary gown. After a long stretch of indecision, I chose the gown. We arrived at the event, arms linked. The hush that fell over the room was immediate, but the hush soon gave way to curious glances, nods, and eventually conversation. We mingled with acquaintances, nibbling on hors d'oeuvres. Nobody confronted me or told me I didn't belong. In fact, an older couple even struck up a conversation about the color of my gown, remarking that it was a lovely shade of midnight blue. When we drove home that night, my heart felt full. Rebecca turned to me at a stoplight and said, "You look dashing tonight." Her eyes sparkled, and I knew she meant it. Work remained a balance of cautiousness and authenticity. I'd now wear a blouse and skirt on days that felt right, and slacks on others. My colleagues adapted. Some who were initially aloof thawed out over time. During a major quarterly review, one coworker, Linda, caught me adjusting my skirt before a presentation. She whispered, "Don't be nervous, Paul. You've got this," with a reassuring smile. It was a small comment, but it made me realize how normal everything was becoming, even in places I once feared the most scrutiny. It wasn't all perfect. Sometimes during long nights, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, and worry about the future. Would I always be judged as different? Would there be events I couldn't attend comfortably? But in those moments, Rebecca was there, gently stroking my arm, reminding me of the strength that comes from living openly. We avoided certain words, choosing to talk instead about growth or progress or honesty. The person I was at home was no longer a secret. My children still loved me, and I was still the man of the house, just one who sometimes wore a sundress in the garden on a lazy Saturday. As the year went on, I realized that the sense of shame I'd carried for decades was fading. I found ways to talk about it openly, explaining it as simply part of who I was, a preference for a different style, a refusal to let society's rules define my wardrobe. Some older friends gave me space, maybe confused. Others said they had suspected for a while that there was some hidden side of me, though they never guessed what it was. Through every awkward conversation, every sidelong glance on the street, every heartfelt moment at home, I learned to stand my ground. It made me see that while clothes don't define us, sometimes they unlock pieces of ourselves that have been silent for too long. The real turning point came when my extended family planned a large reunion at a lakeside cabin. I was excited to see distant cousins I hadn't met in years. Yet the question nagged at me. Did I go wearing men's clothes, playing the part of the person they once knew, or did I show up in a skirt and declare that this was my new normal? I agonized over it in the weeks leading to the reunion. Rebecca saw my turmoil one night as I fretted in the kitchen. She stepped in front of me, placed both hands on my shoulders, and said, "Wear what makes you comfortable. You don't owe them an explanation." Her gaze was steady. "Besides, I'll be there with you." The morning of the reunion, I chose a casual, sleeveless sundress in a soft shade of turquoise. We loaded up the car with coolers and bags, and my hands felt clammy on the steering wheel. Rebecca reached over, resting her hand on mine as we drove. When we arrived at the cabin, greetings and excited chatter filled the air. People hugged, children ran around. Most of them were younger, not part of my immediate circle. And the smell of barbecue drifted from the back porch. My cousins rushed over. Some recognized me with a momentary flash of surprise in their eyes, but all greeted me with the usual warmth. My Aunt Harriet, who was in her 70s, spotted me and did a double take. Her lips parted, and for a fraction of a second, I worried she might say something harsh. But instead, she smiled broadly and said, "Well, Paul, you're glowing today. That color suits you. You always were more stylish than the rest of us." She patted my arm and stepped aside to greet the others. Throughout the afternoon, I told family members about my life since we last met. Many didn't mention the dress at all, too busy sharing details of their own lives. New babies, new jobs, new hobbies. A few asked me about it discreetly, but no one ridiculed me or made me feel unwelcome. By the time the sun set over the lake, painting the water with gold and pink hues, I was playing cards with a handful of relatives on the porch, laughing at someone's goofy stories. The earlier tension in my gut had vanished, replaced by an easy comfort in my own skin. Later that night, while everyone was toasting marshmallows, I stood at the edge of the lake. The moon was high, its reflection dancing on the ripples. Rebecca came up behind me, sliding an arm around my waist. We watched the silver glow on the water. "You okay?" she asked softly, leaning her head on my shoulder. I nodded, gazing at the shimmering surface. "Better than okay," I said. "I never thought I'd be standing here feeling this kind of peace. Even with the stares, with the questions, I'm living my life." I paused, almost overwhelmed by the realization. "And the world didn't end." She kissed my cheek. "I'm proud of you." The warmth in her words filled my chest. I knew there would still be obstacles, but at that moment, I didn't doubt our path ahead. When the weekend ended, we drove back home, the car loaded with leftover food and more stories to share. I felt a calmness settle within me that I'd never known before. The burdens of shame I'd carried for so many years had loosened their grip, replaced by the knowledge that my wife, my kids, my closest friends, and now even my extended family knew this side of me, and life was going on just fine. I continued wearing dresses, sometimes around town, sometimes at home, sometimes at work. Every now and then, I encountered rude comments or uncomfortable silences. They cut deep, but they no longer destroyed me. I had discovered, without using certain words, that it was possible to embrace all parts of oneself without losing everything else. I was still the same person, with the same job, the same loved ones. Clothing was just one facet of me, and perhaps it allowed a brighter, more honest light to shine through. On a quiet Sunday, I found myself in the spare room again. This time, it wasn't under the cover of darkness or in fear of being discovered. I was simply sorting through some old boxes. I stumbled upon a dusty photo album from when I was in my early 20s. Flipping through it, I saw pictures of me and Rebecca, both young, smiling at the camera with a future wide open in front of us. I saw images of Mark and Kelly as little kids, arms thrown around my neck. And there I was, always in the same kind of clothes, plain t-shirts or dress shirts, never daring to express this other part of myself. I traced a finger over one photo, remembering how I had stood behind the camera that day, feeling an indescribable longing I couldn't share. So much time spent worried about what would happen if people found out. Yet now, here I was, flipping through those memories with the knowledge that I was more whole today. I closed the album gently, a sense of calm surging through me. A while later, Rebecca peeked in. "Hey," she said softly. "What are you doing?" I looked up with a small smile. "Just reminiscing." She walked over, sat beside me on the floor, and rested her head on my shoulder. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" I nodded. We sat there in companionable silence for a few minutes, the sunlight streaming in through the window. I wondered where the next few years would take us. Maybe more traveling, maybe grandchildren someday, if Kelly or Mark ever decided on that path. Whatever happened, I wouldn't be going back into hiding. I had found a place in my life that felt genuine, and though we never said certain words aloud, it was clear that my family embraced me. At last, I placed the photo album back in the box. I got up, taking Rebecca's hand, and we walked downstairs to the living room, I poured 2 glasses of iced tea while she put on soft music in the background. We settled on the couch. In that ordinary domestic moment, her hand in mine, music drifting through the air, a floral dress fluttering around my knees, I realized I felt free. And for once, I didn't need to hide it. I whispered her name, and she turned toward me, meeting my eyes. There was an unspoken understanding between us. We would face the looks, the comments, the challenges as they came. We would do it as partners, just like we always had. She leaned her head on my shoulder as I sipped my tea, the mild clink of ice cubes the only sound. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the sky in pale oranges and pinks. It was nothing extraordinary, just another evening in our home. But everything about it felt new. I turned my head, resting my cheek against her hair. "Thank you," I murmured. She didn't ask what for. Maybe she already knew. For her warmth, for staying beside me, for seeing me. A breeze fluttered through the open window, lifting the curtains slightly. I could hear distant sounds, neighbors talking, a car passing, birds chirping. The world carried on, as it always does, and I existed in it, a man with a wife and grown children, wearing a comfortable dress in the last glow of the day, and that was enough.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.